Hello, my beautiful, cute, smart kids. How are you doing? Welcome to the science video number 5 for this semester. And in this video, we'll keep talking about plants reproduction. We have different types of plants reproduction because we have different kinds and types of plants. Let's start reviewing the reproduction that happens in flowering plants. Flowering plants are plants that grow seeds in their flowers. And in this slide, we can see two perfect flowers showing both organs, the female reproductive organ or the pistil, carpel, and the stamen, which is the male reproductive organ. All the parts of a flower are engaged in the reproduction process. Let's start with the petals, for example. Petals have beautiful colors, beautiful smells to attract pollinators to the plant. The sepals protect the flower as it is growing and when it's still a bud. The anther is the first part of the male reproductive organ or the stamen, and this part is responsible of producing pollen grains. The anther is folded by the filament. The female reproductive organ, the carpel, is composed of three parts: the stigma, the style, and the ovary. Now, how does reproduction happen? It starts with the pollinator. This pollinator can be the wind, it can be an animal such as butterflies, bees, bats, different kinds of birds. This pollinator moves the pollen grain from the anther to the stigma. This process is called pollination. So pollination is the process of moving pollen grains from the male anther to the female stigma. The pollen grain will then move through the style to the ovary. When a pollen grain meets an ovule inside the ovary, we get a seed. Once this seed is planted in the soil, we'll have a new plant. Here is a fun game showing the process of reproduction in flowering plants. I will use the mouse to move some pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. The pollen grains will move down through the style to the ovary. Then each pollen grain will meet an ovule in order to make a seed. Sometimes for plants that grow fruits, the flower turns into a fruit. Let's review the parts of a flower. We have to drag the words into the correct spaces. So the anther is the first part of the stamen. I'm gonna make you see the informations. The anther is the structure that contains pollen. The filament is the part that supports the anther. Petals are the colored part that attracts pollinators. Sepals, they are leaf-like structures that protect the flower. The first part of the pistil is the stigma. This is the stigma. It's sticky and it is the head of the female reproductive organ. Then we have the style, which is the part between the stigma and the ovary. And finally, we have the ovary holding the ovules inside. These ovules will turn into seeds after meeting pollen grains, and these yellow points found on the stigma are the pollen grains. Another type of plants are the conifers. Conifers are trees that grow needle leaves. These trees are evergreen and they are called conifers since they grow cones. Conifers grow two types of cones: pollen cones responsible of producing pollen grains, and seed cones which are larger than the pollen cones, and these cones hold the seeds inside. How does pollination or reproduction happen? It is actually a bit similar to the process happening in flowering plants. It's now the wind that pollinates these trees. The wind moves the pollen grains produced by the pollen cones to the seed cones. So this is how pollination or transporting pollen grains happen. When the pollen grains are transferred to the seed cones, they meet the ovules inside and we got the seeds. Once these seeds are planted in the soil, we get a new conifer tree. And we have different examples of conifers, such as the pine tree, the cedar tree, the cypress tree, the spruce tree, giant sequoia, general Sherman, and lots more. Flowering plants grow seeds in their flowers. Conifers grow seeds in their flowers. Flowering plants and conifers are seed plants. They use their seeds to reproduce and make new plants. What about mosses, ferns, and fungi? How do these organisms reproduce? Do they also use their seeds? Actually, mosses and ferns are plants that do not make seeds at all. They are non-seed plants. They have no flowers, they have no cones, so they do not make seeds at all. So, how do they reproduce? Let's see in the next slides. This picture shows mosses. Mosses are soft plants. These plants don't have true roots or true stems or true leaves, but they live in shady places and they make spores. Spores are very tiny organisms, very small things that help mosses reproduce. So these small, tiny organisms, when they find the right place, they will grow into a new moss plant. Look at this video. In this video, we saw spores released from a moss plant. Again, when these tiny organisms called spores find the right place, like dumps, like shady places, they will grow into a new moss plant. Ferns. This picture shows a fern plant. Fern plants have leaves. These leaves are made of other leaflets that we call frond. So this is a frond. The backside of a frond has spores. Let me repeat. Spores are tiny organisms, very little things that are released or made by mosses and ferns in order to reproduce. When these spores find the right place, they will grow into a new moss plant if they are released by mosses and into a new fern plant if they are released by ferns. What about fungi, mushrooms? Take a look on this beautiful fungus. This is a fungus with its cap, with its gills, with its stipe or stem, and let me draw the roots of this mushroom that we call mycelial threads. So what are different parts of a mushroom? The cap, the gills, the stem, and the mycelial threads. Mushrooms or fungi release spores, which are tiny organisms. Look at this fungus releasing spores. When these spores find the right place to grow into a new fungus, they will turn into a new mushroom. But a very important information: fungi are not plants. Mushrooms are not plants. They are another type of living organisms, but they are not plants. They are not animals. Mushrooms or fungi are fungi. They are a separate group of living things that reproduce by making spores. Again, fungi or mushrooms are not plants. Mosses and ferns reproduce by making spores, but mosses and ferns are plants. Fungi use spores to reproduce, but they are not plants. They don't belong to the plant kingdom. Fungi are fungi. They are a special group of living organisms. So, plants. We have seed plants, such as flowering plants and conifers. Flowering plants like the rose plant, the orange tree, the strawberry plant, and the iris plant. Conifers like the general Sherman, the cypress tree, the spruce tree, the cedar tree. Non-seed plants are mosses and ferns. We're not allowed to mention fungi in here since mushrooms or fungi are not plants. Mosses and ferns are non-seed plants. They reproduce by making spores and not seeds. What are some characteristics of mosses and ferns? Mosses, as we said, are soft plants, no true roots, no true leaves, no true stems. Ferns, they have fronds, and on the back side of the frond, they grow spores. Both mosses and ferns reproduce by making tiny organisms called spores. What are some characteristics of a mushroom? A mushroom is a spore-bearing organism. It has 4 different parts: the cap, the gills, the stipe or the stem, and we have here the mycelial threads. People eat mushrooms of all shapes, sizes, and colors. So these mushrooms are called edible mushrooms. I will write it right here. Edible mushrooms. This means that we can eat these species of mushrooms. And actually they are important for us since they are high in fiber and they provide us with many vitamins and minerals. But there are a number of species of mushrooms that are very poisonous and sometimes they look like the edible ones. So don't risk and touch a mushroom by yourself without asking a grown up. So see you next time. This was our lesson. Bye bye.